There was a version of you the world understood, not because it truly knew you, but because that version was convenient, predictable, available, easy to read, easy to influence, easy to guilt, easy to manipulate. People smiled because they knew which words could move you. They knew which silence would make you question yourself. They knew which disappointment would make you apologize for things you never did. And without realizing it, you became a home for everyone else's comfort while slowly becoming a stranger to yourself. No one noticed, not because they couldn't, because they had no reason to. The version of you they loved required nothing from them except attention. It accepted disrespect if it came wrapped in affection. It forgave betrayal if it arrived with an excuse. It sacrificed peace just to keep temporary relationships alive. That version of you believed being understood was more important than understanding yourself. So you kept explaining why you were quiet, explaining why you were tired, explaining why certain words hurt, explaining why certain distances existed, explaining until one day you became exhausted by the sound of your own defense. No dramatic ending happened, no explosion, no final argument, no cinematic goodbye, just silence. The kind of silence no one notices at first. The kind that grows quietly beneath ordinary conversations. The kind that changes everything without asking permission, because real transformation never announces itself. It arrives like winter, slow enough that people ignore it, until one morning they realize the entire landscape has changed. That was you, not louder, not colder, just different. You stopped arguing. You stopped chasing closure. You stopped trying to convince people to see your intentions. Something inside you reached a conclusion long before your mouth ever spoke it. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not everyone deserves access. Not everyone deserves another chance to misunderstand you. And for the first time in your life, you allowed people to believe whatever story made them comfortable, that confused them, more than anger ever could, because anger is predictable. Arguments create connection. Even conflict is still attention, but indifference removes the audience. And people who survive on controlling your reactions suddenly find themselves speaking to a wall that no longer echoes. They call you distant, cold, different, as if your peace became an insult simply because it no longer revolves around their expectations. But what they call cold is actually clarity bad. There is a dangerous moment in every person's life, a moment no one talks about, the moment you stop asking, what if they misunderstand me, and start asking, what if I stop betraying myself just to be understood? Everything changes after that question, because your priorities shift, your energy shifts. Even your posture changes. You no longer enter rooms looking for approval. You enter looking for truth. Who becomes uncomfortable when you stop performing? Who disappears when you stop entertaining? Who becomes angry the moment your boundaries become real instead of theoretical? Those people were never connected to you. They were connected to the version of you they could benefit from. That realization feels like grief, not because you lost them, because you finally saw them. Most manipulation isn't loud. It doesn't wear an evil smile. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it looks like disappointment. Sometimes it sounds like, I've changed. You've become selfish. You used to care. You aren't the same anymore. They're right. You aren't, because the old versions survived by sacrificing itself. The new version survives by protecting itself. There is a difference, a massive one. One bleeds to make others comfortable. The other heals quietly without asking permission. People who benefited from your self-neglect rarely celebrate your self-respect. Think about that. The moment you stop accepting crumbs, those who only intended to give crumbs suddenly accuse you of becoming difficult. Not because you've changed, because the deal changed. You no longer exchange your peace for temporary approval, and that threatens people more than honesty ever will. The strongest people aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who learn to leave without announcing it. They don't slam doors. They simply stop standing in front of doors that were never meant to open. That kind of strength terrifies people because it can't be negotiated. You can't manipulate someone who has already accepted loneliness. You can't threaten someone who no longer fears being misunderstood. You can't control someone whose identity no longer depends on your opinion. That's why your silence suddenly became so loud, not because you spoke less. Because every word you stopped saying removed another handle people used to hold. There comes a point where growth becomes invisible. Nothing changes on the outside. You still smile. You still work. You still answer when necessary. But internally, entire civilizations collapse. Old beliefs disappear. Old fears lose authority. Old identities quietly bury themselves beneath the weight of new awareness. Nobody applauds those moments. Nobody even notices them. Yet those invisible revolutions shape your future far more than public victories ever could. People celebrate success. Few recognize reconstruction. And reconstruction is far more painful, because rebuilding yourself means admitting parts of you were never built for your own happiness. They were built for survival. There is a difference between surviving and living. Most never discover it. You started noticing patterns, not because people changed, because your awareness changed. You saw how easily praise became pressure, how affection sometimes became obligation, how kindness became expectation, how availability became entitlement. And suddenly, everything looked different, not darker, clearer. Clarity often feels lonely because illusion is usually shared by crowds. The moment you stop participating in collective denial, people call you negative, not because you are. Because your awareness interrupts their comfort. Truth has always been disruptive. You learned another lesson, one that almost nobody teaches. Access is earned, not because you're better than anyone, because your peace is valuable. If someone repeatedly leaves you anxious, they haven't earned deeper access. If someone constantly makes you question your worth, they haven't earned another explanation. If someone only remembers your existence when they need something, they haven't earned your availability. This isn't arrogance, it's maintenance. You wouldn't leave the door of your home unlocked for strangers. Why leave the door of your mind open to people who repeatedly bring chaos? The world confuses kindness with unlimited access. It expects compassionate people to remain endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly patient, until one day, compassion learns boundaries. That day shocks everyone, especially those who confused your patience with permission. They never imagined the quiet person would eventually stop carrying everyone's emotional weight. But gravity exists for everyone. Even gentle souls grow tired of carrying mountains they never created. Maybe that's what this transformation really is, not becoming harder. Becoming honest. Honest about what drains you. Honest about what deserves your attention. Honest about who deserves another chance. And who only deserves distance. Distance isn't punishment. Sometimes distance is respect. Respect for your own future. Respect for your nervous system. Respect for the person you're becoming. There will always be people who miss the old you. The version that answered immediately. The version that apologized first. The version that tolerated everything. The version that abandoned itself whenever someone else demanded it. They'll say they miss your kindness. But often, they simply miss your compliance. Those are not the same thing. Real kindness doesn't require self-destruction. Real compassion doesn't require self-abandonment. Real love never asks you to disappear in order for someone else to feel important. Remember that, because forgetting it cost you years. The strange thing about becoming emotionally untouchable is that it doesn't feel powerful. At first, it feels empty, quiet, unfamiliar, almost lonely. Not because you're losing people, because you're losing patterns, you're grieving habits that once convinced you they were love, you're grieving identities built around pleasing everyone except yourself. You're grieving a version of yourself that genuinely believed exhaustion was proof of loyalty. But healing often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Stay with it. Don't run back toward familiar pain simply because unfamiliar peace feels uncomfortable. Peace has a different rhythm. It doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't chase. It doesn't manipulate. It simply waits for you to realize you've been searching for it in places that only knew how to manufacture chaos. One day, someone will meet the person you've become. They'll wonder why you're so calm, why you don't react the way others do, why guilt no longer works, why silence no longer scares you, why walking away seems effortless. They'll think you were born this way. They'll never see the nights that built this version, the betrayals, the disappointments, the quiet decisions, the invisible battles. They'll only see the result, not the cost. And that's okay, because the strongest transformations are never performed for an audience. They're witnessed only by the person who survives them. Maybe that's why they fear the person you've become, not because you're cruel, not because you're distant, but because they can no longer predict you. They can no longer control your emotions. They can no longer pull you back into the version of yourself that existed for their convenience. The old you needed permission, the new you needs purpose. And purpose is impossible to manipulate. There is something people never expect. They expect you to forgive. They expect you to return. They expect time to erase your memory. They expect distance to weaken your resolve. But they never expect silence to become permanent, because silence changes its meaning over time. At first, it sounds like pain. Then it sounds like confusion. Then it becomes reflection. And eventually, it becomes identity. That is the stage they never prepare for. The moment your silence no longer asks questions, the moment it no longer waits for answers, the moment it stops hoping someone will finally understand, because by then, you already understand enough. The old version of you believed every misunderstanding had to be corrected. Every accusation deserved a defense. Every cold shoulder demanded an explanation. You carried conversations long after they had already ended. You replayed arguments in your mind, searching for the perfect sentence that might finally make someone see your heart. But people rarely misunderstand you because of missing information. More often, they misunderstand you because your truth threatens the story they need to believe. No amount of explaining changes someone committed to misunderstanding you. That realization is expensive. It costs years, sometimes decades, but once you pay that price, you stop buying approval. There comes a strange freedom the day you realize not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Your thoughts become quieter, your reactions slower, your words fewer. Not because you've become cold, because you've become selective. You stop speaking just to fill space. You stop answering questions that were never asked with sincerity. You stop offering pieces of yourself to people who only collect them to use later, and suddenly, conversation becomes intentional. Every sentence carries weight, every silence carries meaning. People notice, not because you changed your personality, because you changed your availability. Most people don't miss you. They miss access. They miss knowing you'll answer immediately. They miss knowing guilt still works. They miss knowing they can disappear for months and return exactly where they left you. But one day, they discover something terrifying. You kept growing without them. You learned to laugh without their approval. You found peace without their validation. You built routines that no longer included waiting. That realization is unbearable for anyone who believed they would always have a place they never earned. Growth has a strange side effect. It exposes invisible chains. You begin noticing how often your kindness was expected instead of appreciated, how often your patience was consumed instead of respected, how often your forgiveness became permission. People rarely abuse strength, they abuse availability, because availability feels endless until it isn't, and when it ends, they call it betrayal. But protecting yourself is not betrayal. Abandoning yourself always was. There is a dangerous misconception about peaceful people. Others assume they are weak, they mistake calm for surrender, gentleness for helplessness, patience for fear. They forget something important. The ocean looks peaceful. Until the storm arrives, real strength rarely introduces itself. It simply exists, waiting, watching, choosing carefully where its energy belongs. You became like that, not because life made you bitter, because life taught you the cost of unnecessary reactions. Every argument stole time. Every explanation drained energy. Every attempt to convince someone who refused to listen became another investment with no return. Eventually, you stopped investing. Not because hope disappeared, because wisdom arrived. Wisdom changes your relationship with conflict. You stop asking, "How do I win this argument?" and start asking, "Why am I standing in a room where victory changes nothing?" Some battles leave both sides defeated. Some conversations end exactly where they began. Some people aren't searching for truth. They're searching for emotional control. The moment they realize they can no longer provoke you, they lose interest because control requires participation, and you quietly withdrew yours. Think about the people who became angry when you stopped reacting. What exactly were they losing? Not your friendship, not your affection, your predictability. They knew which buttons to press, which memories to mention, which insecurities to awaken, which guilt to activate. Until one day, none of the buttons worked. The machine had changed. The operating system was different. And suddenly, their map became useless. Nothing frightens manipulation more than unpredictability. One of the hardest lessons you'll ever learn is this. Not every goodbye sounds like goodbye. Sometimes it sounds like a shorter reply, a delayed response, a conversation that slowly stops reaching your heart. Distance rarely begins with footsteps. It begins with realization. The realization that your presence is being treated like a convenience. The realization that your loyalty has become invisible. The realization that you've been pouring oceans into cups that were never meant to hold them. When that awareness arrives, leaving becomes inevitable. Nobody teaches you how exhausting emotional hyper-awareness can become. You notice everything, the hesitation before someone speaks, the shift in tone, the smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the apology that carries no responsibility, the affection that appears only when something is needed. You notice, you always noticed. The difference now is that you no longer ignore it. Awareness without boundaries becomes suffering. Awareness with boundaries becomes wisdom. That distinction changed your life. There is another version of loneliness few people discuss. The loneliness that appears after you stop betraying yourself. At first, your phone becomes quieter, reverbs become emptier, weekends become slower, people disappear. Not because you became difficult, because your boundaries exposed relationships that only survived through your self-sacrifice. Healthy relationships remain, taclomatch ones collapse. It feels painful until you realize quality always requires peace. Crowded lives rarely contain deep peace. The world rewards performance. Smile even when you're exhausted. Agree even when you're uncomfortable. Stay available even when you're falling apart. Pretend everything is fine. You followed those rules for years. Then something inside you rebelled. Not dramatically. Quietly. You stopped pretending. You stopped decorating exhaustion with politeness. You stopped calling disrespect miscommunication. You stopped calling manipulation love. Language matters. The words we choose determine the realities we accept. Once you rename something accurately, you can never comfortably return to the illusion. Perhaps the greatest act of self-respect isn't saying no. It's refusing to explain your no. Because explanations often become negotiations, and your peace was never meant to be negotiated, you don't owe everyone access to your reasoning. Sometimes, no is a complete sentence. The people who respect you will accept it. The people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will fight it. Their reaction tells you everything. Something fascinating happens when you become emotionally disciplined. You stop chasing closure from people incapable of giving it. Instead, you create your own. Not through revenge, not through confrontation, through acceptance. Acceptance that some chapters end without apologies. Acceptance that some people never grow. Acceptance that justice doesn't always arrive wearing the face you expected. Sometimes justice is simply this. You no longer carry what once carried you into darkness. Your peace became expensive, not because you wanted it to, because you finally understood its value. Cheap things are given away freely. Precious things are protected. You began protecting your mornings, your sleep, your focus, your attention, your emotional energy. Some called it selfishness, but gardens only bloom after fences are built. Protection is part of growth, always has been. There are people watching you right now who cannot understand what happened. They remember the version that reacted instantly, the version that chased, the version that over-explained, the version that feared losing everyone. Now they watch someone entirely different, someone whose confidence doesn't depend on applause, someone whose identity isn't built on agreement, someone who can walk away without announcing it. That kind of person is difficult to manipulate, not because they're emotionless, because they've learned emotions don't have to become decisions. The strongest people aren't those who never break. They're the ones who refuse to let breaking become their identity. Every disappointment gave you information. Every betrayal taught discernment. Every lonely season strengthened your inner voice. Nothing was wasted. Not if you learned. Pain becomes poison only when it teaches nothing. You refused to let it remain poison. You turned it into direction. One day, someone will ask what changed you. They'll expect a dramatic story, a single betrayal, a single heartbreak, a single moment. But transformation rarely happens in one event. It happens through thousands of quiet decisions. The decision to stop chasing, the decision to stop explaining, the decision to stop shrinking, the decision to stop carrying what never belonged to you. Small decisions, repeated consistently, until one morning, you wake up as someone the past can no longer recognize. And that is why they fear your silence now, because it no longer sounds like someone waiting to be understood. It sounds like someone who finally understands themselves. That kind of silence cannot be manipulated. It cannot be negotiated. It cannot be broken by guilt. It becomes a language only those who have rebuilt themselves will ever truly understand. There is a question people rarely ask out loud, not because they don't wonder, but because they're afraid of the answer. They ask themselves in silence, late at night, between distractions. During those moments, when the noise of the world fades just enough for honesty to become unavoidable, the question is simple. What happened to you? They remember someone who smiled more, someone who explained everything, someone who gave second chances that should never have existed, someone who answered every message, someone who believed loyalty meant endurance. Then they look at you now, and they can't understand the distance, but they misunderstand one thing: distant didn't change you. Disappointment revealed you. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to become unreachable. You became unreachable one broken promise at a time, one ignored boundary one unnecessary apology, one betrayal disguised as misunderstanding, one moment where your kindness became someone's expectation instead of their gratitude. Transformation is rarely dramatic, it is repetitive. The same lesson, appearing through different faces, until eventually your soul grows tired of repeating the same chapter. And that's when the story changes. Most people believe trust disappears in a single moment. It doesn't. Trust leaks quietly, like water escaping through cracks too small to notice, a forgotten promise, a careless lie, an absence during difficult times, words that don't match actions, little things, almost invisible, until one day you realize there is nothing left to drink. The reservoir is empty, not because one event destroyed it, because 1,000 small moments slowly did. People think your silence is punishment. It isn't. It's evidence. Evidence that your energy finally found somewhere better to live. Once, you invested your emotions into proving your intentions. Now, you invest them into protecting your peace. That shift confuses people because they mistook your availability for permanence. Nothing is permanent, not even patience, especially patience. There comes a season where your life becomes strangely quiet, not because you've failed, because you've stopped forcing what doesn't belong. The conversations become fewer. The invitations become rarer. The circle becomes smaller. At first,